Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be talking about George Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138, and the short student film it was based on. And joining me today to talk THX and La and Sen is our most frequent contributor, making his 19th appearance on Trash Compactor. Welcome, Jonny.
Hello.
Can you believe it's been 19 episodes?
Actually, I was shocked by that. I was like, to me, it almost seems like 5. That's kind of
we've done a lot of these.
A bit bizarre.
And making his Trash Compactor debut, he is one of the proud founding members of the Red 5 Podcast Network, the co-host and resident Star Wars expert of the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast. Welcome, Ro.
I feel welcomed. It's good to be here, and thank you very much for the invite. I have been looking forward to this for a long time. Not in a galaxy far, far away, but we'll make do with what we have. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Of course.
No, well, thanks for joining us. And maybe not in a galaxy far, far away, but definitely Star Wars adjacent.
Yes.
We're kind of getting into the guts of Star Wars and George Lucas here. For the uninitiated, here's the logline for the film THX 1138 from IMDb. In the 25th century, a time when people have designations instead of names, a man, THX 1138, and a woman, LUH 3417, rebel against their rigidly controlled society. And from Wikipedia, THX 1138 is about a dystopian future in which the citizens are controlled by android police and mandatory use of drugs that suppress emotions. I think between those two, I'd say that's a pretty apt description of this film.
Sounds dark and foreboding.
Indeed.
I think George Lucas had a special insight there, to some degree.
He definitely did, and I know coming at this, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but my first exposure to this film was via Star Wars. I was a Star Wars fan, and then I think I was a freshman in high school. I knew of this movie, and then I saw in TV Guide that it was playing on, I think, TCM in the middle of a school day, and I set my VCR, and I was really excited to run home and watch it, and I started watching it, and I'm not embarrassed to say I was quite mystified. I didn't quite know what to make of it.
Yeah, especially at that age.
Did you cry?
I'm going to go ahead and say I didn't cry, but not because there's anything wrong with crying, but I would say I was probably more mystified than anything else. But let's start with overall thoughts on THX 1138. And Ro, I want to start with you. You're on this episode, I should note, because I put out a call on Twitter for the biggest THX 1138 fan out there. And you were one of the first, if not the first, to reply. So, Ro, why are you such a big fan of this movie?
Well, I think for obvious reasons, it's George Lucas's first movie. I remember watching the his college version of this film, which is to a certain degree the college film creatively, I think is a little bit. I'm going to venture to say it's better because of the things that he did in that movie. You know, I think it was the only college film that was processed in color because he had access to a military photo lab. He made some friends and connections there. And I think everybody else was just doing black and white film and doing their little experimental stuff. But I think the original film has such an insight to George's technical abilities that it made me a fan right away. And obviously watching, a big budget version of THX 1138, I'm a big fan of George Lucas. I'm a big fan of American Zoetrope. Him and his buddy Francis Ford Coppola, getting together and starting up that company and making movies. It was one of my inspirations for everything that I have done career-wise. Obviously, you'll hear that George Lucas or Star Wars inspired me to do X, Y, and Z, but really this was one of the films that I took in as almost like a textbook of filmmaking. I think I learned a little bit more about what makes George Lucas tick, especially from a science fiction perspective. Being a science fiction fan, I thought this film had some interesting things to say, both character and technical, really. I think George Lucas is more of a technical director, as people have mentioned before. And I think learning some of those things from this movie, I think I learned a lot about the technicality of filmmaking that I took to heart, and I think I learned something about myself that parallels George Lucas as a college student.
Very well said. That's a very interesting answer. And I kept thinking how much in common we have. I should have had you on the podcast a long time ago. You should come on all the time.
Just let me know where.
Yeah. We will definitely return to the comparison between this feature version and the original USC short. But Jonny, what are your overall thoughts on THX 1138?
I actually agree that I feel like this is kind of like a really good insight into George Lucas's sort of point of view, the way that he handles everything in his future Star Wars movies and stuff like that. I feel like can be seen here. Technically, I feel like it's incredibly impressive to watch, to see what he did with such a small budget, using those kind of like stark real locations wherever they were. I guess, where were they, those locations, like those stark?
They were in and around San Francisco,
Yeah.
like the unfinished subway tunnels and a lot of different buildings and sort of like the infrastructure of San Francisco circa
Yeah.
1971.
I think I remember reading that, like the ladder he's climbing is like the unfinished BART tunnel or something like that. But no, I thought it was really enjoyable to watch. I feel like if you really want to know like George Lucas, the artist, I feel like this is the film to watch. Like it's the heart of everything moving forward from then on out. I kind of felt it was a little ironic in the storytelling of how it's about this guy who him and his partner get off their meds and they find their passion. They're becoming more human again. But the movie's perspective seems to be very observational and clinical. So it's like a passionless lens on a passionate subject. And I thought that was kind of interesting because how much of that is just like putting things through the lens of, say, like a bureaucratic sort of world that they live in, or how much of it is just like George Lucas himself is kind of aloof and he thinks this is really passionate, but I see it as just very sort of clinical, which I thought was an interesting question while watching it.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that. There's a documentary on the Blu-ray. It's a making-of featurette called Artifact from the Future. And the name comes from Walter Murch and George Lucas are both talking about how their approach to this was really, you know, not making a movie set in the future, but they were more trying to make a documentary from the future about this future world, right? And the idea was it doesn't really matter if you understand everything, because it's just sort of like you're a fly on the wall and, you know, this thing has washed up on the shores of time and you just sort of watch it.
Right.
And it kind of is what it is. It's from this world and you get parts of it, you don't get parts of it. But like for me, the best thing about this movie, and I don't mean this in like a derogatory way, but this movie is just a vibe.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to create this mood and this vibe, for lack of a better term, where like the story and the characters are communicated through cinema. It's you know, George Lucas talks about being interested in experimental and avant-garde films when he was in college, and this is sort of like pure cinema kind of fused with narrative filmmaking. And that's why, you know, Ro, you brought up the short film. I think the short film is more effective when all is said and done, because I don't think there's anything in the feature that is not just as effectively done in the short, if not more effectively done in the short. Because again, like in terms of creating a mood and a vibe and a sense of ideas through pure cinema, like the sound and the picture and the juxtaposition of those things, like the short is really so well done in that regard, like to blow it up to feature lengths. And I'm saying this as someone like, I love this movie. I think it's really fantastic. You know, the last time I watched it, I don't know if it was the state of mind I was in or what, but I really connected with it in a very strong way. It just really clicked with me. And that was sort of, I think, the insight I took away from it. I was sort of like, you know, if you're watching it the way you watch a traditional narrative film, like you're not going to pick up what it's doing most effectively. It's about vibes. It's vibes.
Sure.
It's basically my point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said the term, the movie from the future. I always wonder what George Lucas would have been, how his filmmaking would have changed if he didn't do Star Wars, especially watching the student film. I think he had a lot of stuff to say. I think the avant-garde, I think the pure cinema is also something worth mentioning. You know, these films have no exposition, no explanation. I remember hearing an interview of his saying that, there's certain things that he just shot that he could explain them in his head, but he didn't have to explain it to the audience because this movie came from the future. It's the audience now, in 1971 when the movie was released, that is watching it and trying to interpret it. So I think, from a purely cinematic aspect, the visuals, the editing, the framing of certain shots, certain scenes, it all contributes to a narrative that is completely vibe. And like I said, I always wonder what George Lucas would have been as a filmmaker if he didn't get caught up in American Graffiti or Star Wars or helping, with Apocalypse Now. Him and Francis Ford Coppola had a business to run. They did THX. It wasn't received well. A lot of money was lost. They were trying to, trying to be filmmakers. But it's interesting. If I had a time machine or a portal or something, I'd love to see what George would have come up with if he continued on that trajectory of just doing these experimental films. I don't know if he would have been commercially successful, and I don't think that was his goal when he was younger. I don't think anyone who makes a film like that original THX 1138 wants to be commercially viable, but still, I would have liked to have seen, what he would have come up with.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because when you really think about how you go from THX and then you have American Graffiti right after that, and then if you kind of combine both of those aspects together, you get Star Wars, in my opinion. But what I think is interesting is how Star Wars blew up into something bigger than anyone could have ever anticipated. And I feel like so much of the way people take in or consume Star Wars now, and I feel like a lot of the Star Wars storytelling now is basically that. It's storytelling, and it's a lot of content and lore and plot and this character and that character and this and that. And like THX is so not that. And so I feel like if there was anything that's been lost over the past how many decades since THX, it's that initial sort of pure artistic value of like, let me just see how this feels. Like, like cinema is a painting. So like you can just kind of like watch it, let it marinate in you, and then have a discussion about what do you think it all means. And like you, I've often thought about like, what if Star Wars didn't consume George Lucas's life after that? And what if he would have went back to maybe weird art films with Coppola or getting more in touch with Kurosawa before he passed? Like, I just wonder what that would have been like filmmaker, auteur George Lucas that wasn't just the god of Star Wars.
Yeah, and really, real fast. I mean, there's a lot of elements in Star Wars that are present in THX, even the original film. Mm-hmm. We talked about how certain things were either shot or presented, not explained. The easy stuff that comes to mind is when Obi-Wan and Luke are mentioning the Clone Wars, and it's just a line that was said in passing. Sure. It's like, what? As a 7-year-old kid, you're like, Clone Wars? What's that? We don't find out what that is until way later. Those characters know what the Clone Wars are. Mm-hmm. They know what they're talking about. It's just that we don't, but we get to find out later. So it's a great way to communicate through cinema, and I think that's definitely, one of George's strengths.
Yeah. And I find that, at least from my perspective, when it comes to watching any sort of movie, when people don't try to explain something because the characters know already what it is, so why would they explain it? I think another frequent guest of our podcast, Josh Murray, he talks about this when I think he was talking about like writing, and like Hemingway follows this sort of rule where it's like, if two characters in one of his stories make a joke that's like an old joke from 15 years ago in their world, they won't explain it to the reader what they're talking about because they know. Why would they be like, oh, remember that joke that we made up like 15 years ago? There's a lot of that in THX, and there's a lot of that in Star Wars, and I miss that a little bit. And so I feel like THX is like fun in that aspect. When you said Robert Duvall, like Godfather, Robert Duvall before The Godfather. And he's carrying this red cube home. And you're like, what the fuck is that? And it's like, is it his what? Is it his dinner? It doesn't matter. He knows what it is. He knows what he's supposed to do with it, and he does something with it. And it's just like, I like those little touches where it's like, it doesn't matter what that cube is. It's just, this is how weird his world is, you know? And then while watching that, not to go on a tangent, I was thinking about like how George Lucas, who famously hates directing and directing actors, how he conveyed all this to Robert Duvall. and I wonder how Robert Duvall approached a lot of these themes, and if he had to do a lot of internal work by himself, or if George Lucas just told him one sheet and he's like, okay, I know what you mean, and then he just went for it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because once again, I'm going to reference that documentary on the Blu-ray. Robert Duvall, he's interviewed in it, and he said that he really appreciated George Lucas's direction because he would leave you alone.
He doesn't want too much direction, so he just did whatever he felt was right.
Yeah, and I hear this from different actors. Some actors really appreciate a director who kind of gets out of the way and lets them do their thing and only like steps in if there's like a real course correction needed. But beyond that, they trust them to do the job that they hired them to do.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like from how Robert Duvall was explaining it, he found the experience of doing THX and being directed by George Lucas very liberating. He said that he had a great time.
That's great. Because it's interesting because I feel like a lot of visual directors like Ridley Scott, James Cameron, some other people, they kind of have a similar approach. Like I think Ridley Scott says like the casting is so important because once you cast the right actor, he doesn't really have to direct them. He just lets them do their thing. And I was watching the scene where he's being tortured in that cell, and the guys are kind of like talking about like, oh, I put it up to 11, and like you spasm, like, oh no, bring it on the floor. Like, oh, Jesus Christ, Jim, oh, I'm sorry. And I was like, that must have been such a fun day of shooting for Robert Duvall. And as an actor, you can just tell that he's really going for it. It was almost like watching him do like acting exercises just caught on film and put into a movie. So, I mean, how often do you get to do that in a movie?
That scene in particular, I think this was from the commentary track. I could be wrong. But that scene of the two guys, the two voices, I think one is sort of like showing the other one how to work the equipment or whatever it is. Like that's they hired a couple of improvisers from a local theater troupe and just recorded them, riffing for like an hour to get chatter that they could scatter throughout the movie. And that whole exchange was a totally improvised bit that the actors came up with.
That's brilliant. And it works well with the callousness of like the drugged up society that doesn't feel anything. Because clearly it's like he's like a giant rabbit or rat being experimented on. And they just feel like nothing for this guy. He's clearly in pain. And it's both horrifying and funny at the same time, which is kind of disturbing.
Yeah, this movie is kind of disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
Ro, you mentioned there are definitely aspects of THX that are present in Star Wars, and I think the main one for me is kind of this exploration of the relationship between humans and technology. And I was wondering when I decided I wanted to do an episode about THX, it's like, why now? Why is this movie on my mind so much right now? And then I realized pretty quickly it's all the stuff going on right now with AI, or at least what we're calling AI, but how it's just sort of hastening the dehumanization of people in the face of technology taking over more and more aspects of our lives. And I was wondering, do you think this movie has more relevance, more resonance right now for our present moment than, say, 3 or 4 years ago?
I would say yes and always. I think, mankind struggles with technology. I know a lot of focus has been put on artificial intelligence recently, but, take a look at when this movie was released. I mean, the student film 67 and the feature film 71, and they were talking about humanity and machinery. It kind of reminds me, again, another aspect that's in Star Wars, when you have humans, we'll call it the rebels, fighting against this machine that is the Empire. And obviously we can kind of correlate Obi-Wan telling Luke, use the Force, don't use your targeting computer and all that stuff. I mean, those are those subliminal ways that George is kind of telling humanity to be careful. Science fiction writers have been talking about this sort of thing for a long time, but it is definitely I think cyclical. as the technology grows and as we ebb and flow with the understanding of artificial intelligence, which is neither artificial or intelligent at this point. But as any good science fiction, I think it gives us the ability to kind of look at ourselves and our society through a microscope and really examine it through the stories of these movies, of whatever it is that you're looking at, science fiction wise, whatever movies are out there, Terminator, iRobot, whatever. It's a fascinating thing. I always ask guests when I have them on the show, like, what is it about science fiction in general that really fascinates people? And I think it really is. It comes down to the examination of humanity and our role in reality and society.
Yeah. And I also think that this movie will be relevant, like always, because it's not only just technology, but it's also just the look of authority and doing what you're told, which is just universal since civilization, basically. With technology, especially with AI, it's like we're getting told, like, well, this is the way of the future. This is how it's going to be. Are we going to be replaced voluntarily? Are we just going to walk through that and be, like, okay with it? And at the time this was made, because they started shooting, I think, in late 69, and it finally came out in 71. So the Vietnam War was, like, at its peak. You have Richard Nixon, and you have people going to war and dying on a daily basis in high numbers. And then you see them at his job, and it's like, oh, today was a good day because we only lost 200 people today instead of, like, the other place that lost 300 people. And it's like, oh, that's not so bad. And I imagine some people at home were hearing reports about Vietnam maybe and thinking similar things where it's like, oh, only like 50 soldiers died today, not 100. It's a good day, So It was relevant then, and it will just keep being relevant until the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, because it's both parallels of technology and authority.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well said. On that note, we just did an episode not long ago with this kind of AI explosion. I kept finding myself returning to this question. I kept wanting to know what George Lucas thinks about generative AI in creative pursuits and, like, filmmaking and stuff, because a lot of his movies really place humanity above technology, yet he himself is, an early adopter, a pioneer of new technologies. And, long story short, I posed this question and somebody replied, to know what George Lucas would think about AI, all you have to do is watch THX 1138. And yes and no, I'm not sure that that's true. Because in this movie, he's clearly lamenting the loss of humanity in the face of this technocratic society that relies on technology to maintain order or whatever. But, like you were saying, John, like he's a filmmaker that's very interested in the technical side of filmmaking. He's interested in the toys. He loves to fix and race cars. He loves, he loves machines, and I think that's why so much of his work is really about that relationship between humans and their machines. And he's definitely not against technology. So I'm wondering, like, based on this movie, what you think it is he's against.
Yeah, I don't think that he hates machineries or technology. And here's the thing. I think it's the duality of mankind, too. I mean, we're afraid of something until we understand it, and then we're using it till we're blue in the face. Yep. I mean, this kind of illustrates that point. On the surface, obviously, you take a look at a film like THX 1138, whether it's the theatrical release or his student film, and it is kind of scary. I mean, you are thrust into this dystopian world where freedoms are curtailed, et cetera, et cetera. But you jump forward and George Lucas is using all the technology, all the bells and whistles to fix a movie that he did, in 1977, 20 years later to make it better. When we are able to understand the tools that we are using, I think the fear kind of slips away. And now, obviously, George Lucas is one of the pioneers of digital filmmaking. It's a little weird dichotomy there, the duality of an artist per se, but really the duality of mankind. It's interesting. I think, again, THX 1138, it's an understated film in the archives of George Lucas. I think a lot of people may look at it and not understand too much of it, or kind of just gloss over the surface level message of, technology bad, humankind must survive. But I think there's more, if you dig a little deeper, there's a lot more there.
I think if I have to whip out an opinion out of nowhere, I think with all of his movies, a common thing that he has with technology is that it's not so much whether or not technology is good or bad as much as like not having human input or like a soul. So like I think automation without any sort of human decision making scares him. The society in THX is all very automated, and humans are just letting like programs and algorithms make decisions for us. That's what scares him. When you look at Star Wars, the droid army, they're an automated army, they're bad. And the reason why the clones are better is because they're actual people making decisions. But he loves the technology. So it's like George Lucas, I feel like, is always pushing technology with filmmaking because it allows his paintbrush to be more sophisticated. And it allows his easel and canvas to be more sophisticated. Look at all these colors I can use and how many different ways I can make these things. But you still need the artist to hold the brush. You still need the artist to put the pen to paper or something like that. So as long as a human or something with equivalent human behaviors behind it, I mean, I'm pretty sure he would even be okay with like synthetics and replicants from other sci-fi universes because they all are basically the equivalent of humans. But once you just have like a soulless automated factory popping out decisions for society for us, I think that's what scares me.
You just made me think of that line that 3PO has in Attack of the Clones in the droid factory sequence. He sees what's going on, and then 3PO has this line, "Machines making machines, how perverse."
Yeah, because he was made by a person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you said, nobody likes to be told what to do. And I think, when it comes to having, automatons making decisions for you, it's also a little autobiographical for George Lucas. I think, George Lucas wanted to be a filmmaker, artist extraordinaire. His father wanted him to be part of the family paper company business, whatever it was up there in Northern California. He wanted no part of it. He didn't want to be told what to do with his future. He wanted to race cars and make movies and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's interesting. But like I said, I think nobody likes to be told what to do, how to do it, how high to jump, when to go to bed, when to eat your green beans, all that stuff. It's, again, it just kind of reaches into the primordial notion of mankind and our exploration of self.
Yeah, I agree.
And you almost kind of get the sense from watching this movie, I just really started thinking about this the last time I watched it. I was wondering who's actually running this show? Like, who's actually in charge here? Like, is it sort of like a council of like robed humans, or is it a computer brain somewhere? And where I quickly landed, I think they forgot. I don't think anybody knows exactly why they are doing these things. These systems are just still running, because it's interesting. Like the RoboCops, as I call them, the android police.
They look really cool, by the way.
They look awesome. Yeah. They aren't in charge, and they are ultimately controlled by humans sitting in a control room.
Yep.
Right? But where are they getting their instructions from? And it just kind of got the impression it's sort of this like Kafka-esque, bureaucratic, technocratic monstrosity that like no one's in charge. And it's just sort of still running.
It's interesting watching it now in 2024 because we're in the 21st century now. When you think about what we thought the future was going to be going back to the days of the Jetsons, the future is like technology is so good that we would have more time and leisure to pursue the humanities and stuff like that. But in our current society, it's the opposite, where technology is so good that the expectations keep increasing. Now people are working 24/7 around the clock. So it's just one of those things where it's like you're saying, who's in charge of the system? The movie kind of reminds me to question, like, well, why are we doing what we're doing anyway with even mundane jobs? It's like, why do we have to work like 40 or more hours a week to do this thing, to make meager amount of money to pay our bills? It's like, who's in charge of this? How did they get here? Like, we have so much technology and food and water and at our access, and yet we're still like struggling to get by. It's like, how did this happen? And I feel like THX is like the exaggeration of that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing, though, too, like you mentioned the 40-hour work week, we all don't really think about why we work 5 days a week for 40 hours. But, like, it's a vestige of, decisions that were made 100 years ago that people actually fought for. And, like, we live in this world where that's just natural, the same way that people in this subterranean civilization of THX, they're all just like, I mean, this is the way it is. Like, the whole way that George Lucas describes this movie is about a prison with the doors open. You're a prisoner until you realize you can just leave, but you have to have the courage to walk through that open door and see what's on the other side. And that's a theme he returns to in Graffiti. It's a theme he returns to in Star Wars. I've always considered, and I'm not the only one who has said this, so it's not something super profound, but THX and American Graffiti and Star Wars comprise a really effective trilogy on their own. All 3 movies have to do with choosing to leave your small world to enter a larger world.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody talks about Campbell's hero's journey, and I think we all have our own hero's journey, but I think it's a prevalent theme in Star Wars. Obviously, it's a prevalent theme in the 3 properties that you just mentioned. I don't think it's unique to George Lucas. He had a very good command of the concept through his background in anthropology and human studies and humanities and stuff, and obviously his relationship with Campbell. But it's really interesting to utilize that non-science fiction discipline to kind of imbue those themes into a story that's got laser swords and spaceships.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes the best examples of a genre are when someone gets involved to create something in that genre, but they never were like a super fan of that genre. And that's when you usually get the best stuff, like everyone's going crazy over Andor, and Tony Gilroy was like, yeah, I never really was crazy about Star Wars. And it's like, and it's precisely because of that he was able to make a great Star Wars.
Irving Kershner in The Empire Strikes Back, he wasn't a big sci-fi fan. Like, yeah, I get it. I think the most important part is, a lot of people say, oh, you got to have a fan do the work, Sometimes you don't. You just have to have a good artist who is either a good writer or director, be able to tell the story, because I don't think it's necessarily imperative for any one particular genre to have a showrunner or a head that is, part of that genre, because sometimes, you do get blinded a little bit. Sometimes you do get distracted by the minutia of the science fiction, all the details there. And then you forget to tell a good story. And I think whatever genre, you've got to start with that blueprint, that story.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Even with like talking about the new Star Wars stuff, I feel like it's kind of caught in that sort of like cycle of like fans talking about the content, talking about the lore, and it's like you need outside perspectives to come in and be like, well, here's just a story about people who are trying to fight tyranny. It has nothing to do with like whether Fred Jedi is the grandfather of Bill Jedi. What was the story about? It's about fighting autocracy or something like that. And then from that perspective, you can make something great. I mean, even when you look at the original Star Wars, it's like you can see Akira Kurosawa, you can see Lawrence of Arabia, you can see all the movies that inspired him to make a great movie that happened to be a Star Wars movie. But what are we talking about with THX? Like, I wonder what those inspirations are for him. I mean, clearly he's interested in technology on some level, but I kind of see that anti-authority look. I kind of see response to the Vietnam War. I see a response to Nixon, and I see him loving the avant-garde. And so he just brings all that into this crazy fucking movie that no one's ever seen before.
Yeah. And, you guys mentioned the documentary on the DVD. I think if anybody is able to grab that THX 1138 DVD, it's the white one with Robert Duvall and the earring thing. First of all, my version came with an actual earring, the THX earring, but there are so many wonderful, wonderful interviews and little behind the scenes documentaries on that disc. I usually keep it at arm's length because, again, all the behind the scenes stuff is material that I kind of used almost as a textbook growing up, just learning as much as I could about, ILM and George Lucas and all the people behind the scenes. So wonderful, wonderful disc. If you can pick it up on Amazon, I encourage you to do so.
And can someone remind me again who did the music for this movie? Because I was immediately struck.
Lalo Schifrin.
Shaft.
Really?
He also wrote the Mission Impossible theme.
Oh, shit. All right, I need to look up.
Yeah, the music for this movie is actually really, really good.
Really good.
Because it really fits and enhances the movie so well. You know, it's not front and center the way that it is in, say, Star Wars or even American Graffiti, but it is so effective. You know, he really understood the role of the music and what the music had to be for this movie, and it really just contributes to that vibe, that mood, and that tone. It's really good, to the point where I've actually been trying to track down the soundtrack. It was released, I think, in the 2000s, and it's sadly out of print. And to get a copy, it's like several $100s, which I'm not about to shell out. But
because recently in my own life, I've been listening to a lot more atmospheric music and Tangerine Dream and stuff like that. So when this music popped off, now I hadn't seen this movie since college, so it's been about like 20 years since I'd seen the movie. And then so as soon as the movie started, I was like, oh, this music's really good. And I kept noting it throughout the entire movie. I was like, who did this? Was he this guy again?
You just made me go to eBay.
what's the cheapest price you see?
$45.
Oh, okay. So that's actually less. It's still a lot for a CD, but
yeah, it is. $60. Buy it now. $84 plus $25 shipping because it's from Japan.
It's expensive. I don't know. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and like I start scrolling on my phone and I look at stuff on eBay and it's so easy. It's just one click, and sometimes I end up purchasing things when my will is weak in the wee hours.
Yeah. I've done that with lenses and lightsabers.
Oh, God.
Lenses and lightsabers. That should be the name of a podcast.
That should. I'm writing it down.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, too, Donald Pleasence, Halloween fame. He killed it in this movie, and he was so disturbing in such a weird way. Earlier in the podcast, when I said how he made a movie about someone finding their passion, but it seemed very passionless. This character, we're like, what the fuck is his deal in the best way possible? And talk about like watching him from like clinical point of view, where it's just like a scientist looking at like maybe like a sociopath or someone who's clearly like mentally had like an episode before the movie started, you know? And then we're just kind of like caught in the chaos of him. And even the way that he's like detained later, where he's just like talking to a kid who is kind of like he doesn't even know like what to do with himself, like when he's like out in public. I was like, this guy is so creepy and crazy, but like it's so engaging to watch. I don't know. I just wish I was there the days they shot his scenes. I could see him like work.
I want you to be my roommate.
That's Donald Pleasence for you. I mean, he's a commanding presence. I was watching some behind the scenes of Halloween, and not that he stays in character, but he's definitely would have been wonderful to watch work.
Yeah, 100%. I was like, this guy's like a top tier. This guy's on another level.
I just watched an Outer Limits episode that he was in, and he was absolutely mesmerizing to watch. The Donald Pleasence character, SEN 5241. I knew the SEN, but I had to look at my notes for the 5241.
Cheater.
Am I reading too much into it, or is he coded as gay? I mean, like, is he attracted to?
I got the vibe that he might have been gay for Robert Duvall, but what I did definitely pick up on is that it seemed like he killed his roommate, so that there could be an opening for Robert Duvall to move in with him.
Right.
Yeah.
A little Jeffrey Dahmer-esque there.
Yeah. And even to the point where at the end where like, is he interacting with kids before he gets caught? Like he kind of seems clueless. But when I was watching him, I picked up on that, Josh. And I was like, he seems like he's being coded for being gay. But, which is like an old trope of like the creepy, scary big guy, you know?
Yeah, it seems like an unfortunate stereotype that I don't know if like they were aware they were playing into, or if Donald Pleasence sort of zeroed in on that and played it up.
I almost think it's a Pleasence. Yeah, I almost think it's a Pleasence thing. I can't imagine George Lucas, putting that to paper. I think it definitely, because of Donald Pleasence, there's a certain little twisted aspect of his performances in all the characters that he plays that I feel like he kind of tweaked this a little bit. But it's like you were saying, it's very subtle, but it's there.
Yeah,
for sure.
And now that you mentioned it, while you were talking, I was picturing in my head, well, what if other actors played his role? And immediately Dennis Hopper popped into my head. And if Dennis Hopper had the same lines and the same scenes, I don't think he would have came off coded as gay. So,
yeah, he would just seem like a psychopath.
Exactly. So I feel like any other actor in that role would come off as a psychopath. So to what you were saying, I feel like Donald Pleasence probably made that decision, and George was probably fine with it.
Yeah, like I have a hard time imagining them writing it that way explicitly. So, but I do then have to wonder, like, what was the intent here? And then it is sort of an interesting question. How would a society like this handle, like, a very smart psychopath?
Yeah.
Right? Who, like, knew how to game the system the way that he says. He even says, like, I'm very good with computers. Like, I can program myself access for wherever. And it's kind of like how this society has tried to program and drug every kind of individuality and every kind of desire and variable and sort of leveled everything out. But I think the Donald Pleasence character is just showing you can't really nullify human nature, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And I also think, too, even if you take the angle of him being gay for Robert Duvall, I think that in some subconscious level triggers Robert Duvall, not necessarily because of his sexuality, but because of any sort of like feeling is something that he's struggling to deal with. So if you like, it's not just that he's a psycho who could be dangerous, who's bothering him. He's also a psycho who could be dangerous, who might be interested in him romantically. And Robert Duvall is trying to figure out what feelings even are. So I feel like make him react even more so the way he reacted if he thought that he was being like wooed in any sort of way by a guy that makes him feel uncomfortable.
And I also think it freaks him out too because he's not used to somebody, not following the rules, which SEN is clearly demonstrating. His whole modus operandi is like, look how I can game the system, right? And, like, what do you make of a sort of, like, free-floating agent of chaos in a system like that? It's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, look how Robert Duvall at his most angry is just like, I'll report you. And then he reports them. He's like, that'll do it. And it's like, and, Donald Pleasence is like, well, I'm fine. Report me. It doesn't really matter. He's still going to slip through that. And Robert Duvall's like, oh, you're making me so mad. I'm going to write this sternly worded letter and send it to the government and see what they do about it. Instead of actually like trying to kill him or mess him up in some more violent or straightforward way.
Next week, we should come back and talk about George Lucas's statement that might be controversial. The aspect of, I guess, the machinery or being controlled as almost a religious artifact. We've got, obviously the character of Om or the almighty, overseer. I was looking through some pictures here, and I'm not sure if you see it in the movie. I think it's a behind-the-scenes thing. Robert Duvall and Donald Pleasence are sitting on a bench in the White Room, and there's some graffiti up in the corner that says, Om is a hologram. And I'm not sure if that's in the film. I don't remember it in the film, but it blew my mind. I'm just looking at it now. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it tells you a lot.
That's great. Like the whole idea of them being in prison and someone kind of just like figuring it out that like this is all bullshit. But it's so like in the background and I even paid attention to, which is very much in the vein of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it also makes sense too because they can have the truth, the reality of their situation right in front of them, but they can't accept it because then the whole thing will fall apart. It's very telling. It's pretty profound that, Donald Pleasence, who we've characterized as a psychopath, he's kind of a manipulator. He's kind of figured out how to game the system. When he has the opportunity to escape, he can't. Mm-hmm. He won't.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So even someone who gets off on, the power, he's nothing without that system to manipulate.
That's exactly it. Because once he's outside of it, he's useless. He's powerless.
Yeah, and is he powerless because there's nothing to him, or is he powerless because he just forgot how to be human?
Exactly.
I mean, if he ever knew.
Yeah.
And that's really again, that goes back to the question that we all have. Like, what is it that makes us tick?
Mm-hmm.
Is it this or is it that?
With Robert Duvall, it's almost basically that curiosity is what drove him. Like knowing that there has to be something else than this. And then when he finally gets out to the surface and you see the sun and the credits are rolling, it's perfect if the movie ends there because it's really not about like, what's he going to do now? It's just the fact that he did it. And like,
Yeah, right.
he could, in all probability, starve to death or die from the elements like a couple of days later. But that kind of doesn't really matter. He just had to know that there was something else out there that's bigger than what he was living in. And then it's just the idea of hope and potential.
Right.
You know, it's like, who cares what happens to him after that? It's just that he got out. And like, that's the thing that's important.
Right. John, you invoked Andor a little while ago. The prison arc of Andor, I got serious THX vibes from that whole arc. So, like, aside from, like, the design of the prison, the whole idea that they're in a prison, the clothes that they wear, and even stuff not in the prison, like the way that they utilized real-world locations, like that same brutalist architecture to create this feeling of this authoritarian state that they're living in. And then when he's at work, you know, constructing the RoboCops, it's like when Cassian and the other prisoners are building the parts for the Death Star, literally helping to build the instrument of their own oppression.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. It's too coincidental for it to be a coincidence, but I wonder if, Gilroy did have Lucas's THX in mind, or if it's just kind of a weird, universal theme that runs through, I don't know, certain stories. And then, the prison stuff was not, a short story arc in Andor. It was pretty much, a large component of the story. So it's interesting to kind of think that. I mean, there's a lot of, besides the visuals, there are a lot of parallels, like you mentioned, regarding the two shows.
Yeah.
Never really thought of it.
Yeah, and I think that prison arc is like the heart of the whole story of Andor, why they do what they do. And there are a lot of parallels even just with the characters, like Andy Serkis is not a psycho, but he's terrified of leaving the prison because he knows the system, and he has to hope that the system is going to work. And so when he realizes that he's never going to get out, and that they're killing the people or cycling them back in, he has basically like a panic attack. And just that whole idea of like these people thinking they're in something that works a certain way, and then to a certain extent it's like maybe they kind of forget that there might even be an end to their sentence. Like they just accept that like this is the way life is now, and they're just happy to get their tube of food every single day, and that's it.
The sequel to THX 1138 could have been that middle prison segment in Andor.
Yeah.
If they escape, they come back and recycle through.
Yeah.
So how's that for subverting expectations?
It's like a Twilight Zone. It's terrifying. What version of the movie did you watch? I assume you watched the special edition version that came out in like 2004.
Yeah.
That had
I saw the one with all the new special effects.
Yes, I think I did. It's whatever the white DVD is.
Yeah.
With the side of Duvall's head.
It's pretty obvious when it happens, because all of a sudden they'll just be like crazy streetcar shots or like the creatures. And I think even when he's doing the work on the robots, when he's dropping the core, it's all like digital and crazy special effects. Didn't really bother me that much though. I think if I had to choice, I'm kind of curious. I would always like to watch the original way things came out in the theater. Mm-hmm. But at least the changes in this, I thought tonally weren't jarring compared to maybe some other changes that have been happening in the Star Wars movies.
I would agree, yeah.
I don't know. It drives me up the wall. That one shot, you alluded to it, of the car where it's sort of like weaving in and out of traffic.
Yeah.
The camera move is like so unlike anything else in the film. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, what?
Well, this is a whole other conversation about like restraint.
No, I know.
Matching styles and stuff like that. But
I know. I don't want to.
I
don't want to devolve into a special edition conversation. But like, I just don't.
I will say this though. The scene when they get out of the prison with the hologram and Donald Pleasence, and all of a sudden they get caught up with like a circling pattern of like thousands of people. You can tell that they digitally enhanced it to add more people in the background. And that, to me, was very effective because they made it, from one dreamscape, which is the all-white room, to the equivalent of like a hellscape with like thousands of people going around, and they're like salmon trying to fight the stream, and And I was like, that was very evocative to me of just like pure anxiety and terror. It's like getting caught up in the cog of like their life again, you know?
Right. You look like you're in one of those prisons now.
Yeah.
As a matter of
Yeah,
fact.
exactly.
Yeah, that sequence is more effective. The other sequence that I have to admit is more effective because I didn't really understand it until I saw the special edition version was when Robert Duvall is watching that like hologram sex show, and like the machine is you know,
Jerking him off.
is jerking him off. That was unclear to me that that's what was happening in the original version.
Yeah.
So I guess that CGI jerk-off machine actually helped clarify something that
That's the name of this episode, CGI jerk-off machine.
There you go. Yes. Description in the notes.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't mind stuff like that when it makes things more clear or more specific, more precise. But I didn't need all the fast-paced car shots, but they were so short that like it didn't really matter to me. It wasn't like all of a sudden he put in a bunch of like dick and fart jokes that didn't fit. It all tonally kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it, though, with this movie in particular, is that it is such an artifact of its time. It's like, you know, it's the future, but they have, like, punch cards and like, meters and
everything's analog.
Everything's analog, and it's like, that works because that's the aesthetic, that's the vibe. So then all of a sudden, like when you have a shot like that CGI car weaving in and out of traffic, it just like feels, for me, it just feels very unlike what's going on either side of it stylistically.
There was one shot that distracted me, and ironically, it wasn't the big flashy stuff. It was when they put the mind lock on him. And I think they CGI'd his eyes, like, rolling a little bit and stuff like that. I was like, why do they do that? Yeah. Anyone can do that normally. Like, was Robert Duvall not looking convincing enough being in a mind lock? Like, I just felt like it was an arbitrary choice to make his eyes look more like they were rolling in a more extreme manner. But I was like, I don't know. That just seems a bit excessive.
I'm actually not sure on that one.
Yeah, I wonder if practically he just didn't want to wear, you know, some sort of contacts.
But I feel like we could all roll our eyes.
But actually, completely white though?
Actually,
not
John, I don't know if we all can.
But I'm trying. But
he's trying now.
It's the image of anyone rolling their eyes up is obviously not normal. So it doesn't have to be completely white.
Right.
But he was like, no, they have to be completely white. And it's like, well, who cares? like I don't think anyone's gonna be confused if they saw his eyes wildly moving around and going up, that he's like clearly having like a brain fart at that moment, you know.
Yeah. I'm looking at the altered image, and it does look a little, you know, I think it looks creepier than the normal image.
More unsettling, I guess.
Yeah. I'm okay with that decision, I guess.
Nitpicking, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like, my main thing is just, like, a larger issue that, like you, John, I am a purist. I think that, like, you know, movies are a product of their time, and I'm interested in seeing the movie the way that it was released when it was made originally, because as much as you try, like, to remove the context from the time and the place in which it was made, it's an exercise in futility.
I mean, Jaws would be very different if they went back and added, like, a CG shark to add in all the shots that they couldn't get. It's like, you can't do that. You have to let it be what it is. And from 1975, this should be from 1971. It should feel like 1971. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, like, I look at the Mona Lisa and I don't think to myself, how come it doesn't feel like 2024 when I look at the Mona Lisa? Like, no, it should feel like the Italian Renaissance. That's when it was made. Let it be the Italian Renaissance.
The Mona Lisa, the special edition.
Or the hologram or some shit.
Just a couple more things before I start wrapping up here. But one of the movie's strengths that is another reason why I really have trouble with the special edition changes is that, like, you know, this is a big sci-fi movie that really feels like it's in a sci-fi world. It's visually stunning. Not a lot of special effects in this movie. The way that they utilized real-world locations, the way that George Lucas shot it, the way that he lit it, the way that he framed things, like, This movie was made it had a budget of $777,777.77. A few years later, you get Logan's Run, which is also a movie about a dystopian future with like an underground subterranean society that costs $9 million to make. And Logan's Run today is like a punchline.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I love it, but not for its, like, gritty realism. It's, like, very hokey looking. And this movie is so successful at creating a fully believable, visually gorgeous sci-fi world of the future. And then to just all of a sudden, like, throw in some CGI shots, like, for me, it's like you're ruining something about it that was so special.
Yeah.
I agree.
And I actually got a very interesting insight from an interview I did a couple episodes ago with David West Reynolds, who's the archaeologist who went and rediscovered all of the Tunisia shooting locations for the original Star Wars. And he ended up working at Lucasfilm for a time. And he was talking with George Lucas about like his enthusiasm for like how well selected and how well shot those locations were in Tunisia. And George Lucas was like, no, it was awful. Like, I hate shooting on location. Like, you don't have any control over anything, and like, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, like, one gets the impression that if he were to make this movie now, he would just create the whole thing in CGI. He'd create the whole city in CGI now.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Just given the nature of the prequels. I mean, he shot it all on the green screen because he could, and he likes it to be easy, so he could just like create it in the edit, because post, you know, I think he just lives in post, and so if he can just shoot it on the green screen, he can make the background whatever he wants, and I think to him that's just the dream. We don't agree. I don't agree, but it's just that's just his way.
That's his way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would hope that was not the case. I have a feeling that you're right, but you know, the movie was shot in such a way that it did evoke some sort of claustrophobia, both versions really. You know, credit to the cinematographer. And it's funny, we play around with numbers, you know, THX 1138. You see that number in Star Wars. You see it in American Graffiti. Sometimes you see it in other non-Star Wars movies as a homage to George Lucas and his legacy. Mm-hmm. But, you know, getting to the play of numbers, the photographer, the cinematographer, Albert King, was born on May 25th.
Really?
Can you believe that? May 25th. That's so weird.
Yeah.
Star Wars Day.
Yeah.
I mean, not officially now.
Oh, I'm a purist. Star Wars Day is always May 25th.
May 25th.
May the 4th.
Yeah. May
the 4th be with you is some goofy marketing ploy that some executive said, "Hey, let's sell some toys." Fuck that.
Closing thoughts on THX 1138. Are you glad you revisited it?
No, super glad. Tomorrow I'll probably pop in that DVD and watch it again.
Yeah, I was very glad to watch it again. I do wonder if it's more successful as a short film than as a feature film, because my personal opinion on avant-garde and art in general, if you're going to show me something that's more in the realm of art, I love the freedom of having the audience choose the amount of time of how much they want to experience it and walk away from it. And so with avant-garde cinema, I feel like it's more demanding if you're going to tell someone to sit still and watch it for a certain given amount of time. And 45-minute short film, I feel like is the perfect amount of time for this story. This story was like a 2-hour-long movie. And I remember feeling the time while watching it. Because of the passionless sort of clinical perspective, it made it feel slower than it actually might have been if it weren't told through that sort of lens. So ultimately, yes, I love the movie. It's great. But I also feel like it might have just been more effective as a short film, and he lost it at that. But at the same time, if he did that, he never would have gotten all the other movies that came after that, I feel like.
I would agree with you on the time length. Yeah, again, I mean, it's just, you know, it's unique visually.
Yeah.
I think, you know, again, I said it at the top of the show. It would have been intriguing to see George Lucas as a filmmaker sans Star Wars, just to see where you know his voice would have taken him.
No, yeah, I agree.
You know, and a lot of people, you know, you can argue that Star Wars was his own avant-garde film. I mean, you know, he had a lot of trouble producing the first one, and he wrote himself a check to do the prequels. So, I mean, he was his own boss, really. And that was the way that he likes to work, and the way that a filmmaker, you know, at the beginning of his career works, because, you know, nobody cares what you do. But as a multi-millionaire filmmaker that is doing work on the prequels his own way, you know, it's an interesting contrast between the rich filmmaker who has everything at his fingertips, and the student filmmaker who scratched and clawed for every piece of film that he could muster to create even the short 17-minute version. Being able to go and have access to the photo lab and shoot weird angles so it looks kind of futuristic and all that stuff. I think the language is the same for both the big films and his student films. But, you know, if you're going to give credit to George Lucas, I think that's definitely one aspect of his filmmaking that people should pay attention to.
Yeah.
Very well said. Yeah, you know, Star Wars in a lot of ways, I think, became kind of the tail wagging the dog, as it were. Like, you know, conceptually, the original Star Wars, a part of the concept was you walk in to like week 4 of a serial that's already going on, and you're just sort of thrown in the middle of it. Like, that's a pretty high concept experimental idea. And then, you know, once it became Star Wars the saga, I feel like even George Lucas felt kind of beholden to finishing the saga.
Yeah.
Like making it a saga. So
Right.
yeah, you know, if Star Wars like had a respectable return and it wasn't the cultural juggernaut phenomenon that it became, I wonder if we would have gotten, you know, a THX 1139 or, you know,
Yeah.
like something. I mean, not literally a sequel, but like more films in the vein of
Sure.
Yeah.
of this film.
I forgot that the movie starts with the same typeface as the Star Wars typeface, like the green letters over black, you know, Lucasfilm Ltd. Sort of stuff. And then they immediately go into a whole Flash Gordon thing. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, if I didn't know I was about to watch THX 1138, I would think I'm about to watch some sort of documentary about Star Wars. And, like, because that's the purity of what he wanted Star Wars to be, which is basically Flash Gordon. And so it's interesting to see, like, this really is, like, the proto-Star Wars movie before he gets to his true magnum opus, you know?
No, absolutely. Well said. I could talk about this movie for another hour. The one thing that I will say is that every time I watch it, I get more out of it. And I think it's best experienced with the mindset of just kind of let it wash over you and let it sort of do its thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think is the best way to kind of meet it where it's coming from. So I want to thank both you guys, John and Ro. Ro, where can people find the Scarif Scuttlebutt podcast and anything else you want to plug?
Sure, yeah. Just turn over to your smart speaker and tell Siri to play the latest Scare Scuttlebutt podcast. We are found wherever you find your other favorite podcasts, part of the Red 5 network. You can check out the rest of the team at bio.link/Red5 or thered5network.com. I usually drop new episodes on Thursdays and usually do some live shows on Saturdays at 7 o'clock on the YouTubes. So, yeah, come on over to the Scare Scuttlebutt podcast whenever you guys want, and we'll hang out.
And that's the Scuttlebutt, as they say.
They do say that, don't they?
Yeah. If you like what you heard, please consider following us at TrashComPod across all social media, including TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Transcripts for this episode and all our other episodes are available at trashcompod.com. If you're so inclined to rate and or review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the platform of your choice, we would be eternally grateful. And we will see you on the next one.